Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever.
Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host and head practitioner, Shannon Callery. Welcome to the
Hello.
So, big topic today. I'm really excited for this because I think this is going to help people understand such the biggest differences between Western medicine and us when it comes to lab work. We're talking about blood tests, lab ranges, how we look at blood work, how we interpret blood work, patterns that show up. And we get this comment and question all of the time of, hey, my blood work is totally normal. Should I even send it to you? Is there other testing I need to do? And, what are the differences between, what you looked, how my doctor looked at my lab work versus what you guys are going to look at. And this episode's going to explain it all. And blood work is such a huge passion of ours. And when I went through the course, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Michael Rutherford, who owns Fundamental Wellness. And I went through his blood chemistry course a few years ago. Shannon has now gone through it. Brennan is now wrapping up for time in it. And I did so much research before choosing what kind of course I wanted to do. I knew blood work was kind of my next step. And as soon as I took the course and really started implementing it, it was such a game changer in the practice and how we were able to help and serve people. Just the amount of information that we had and were able to work with skyrocketed after we learned this. And, huge shout out to Mike Rutherford. I have so much respect for him and all of the work that he does and all of his courses. If you're a practitioner and you're listening to this, I cannot recommend his course enough. And I would say the biggest difference, and then I'm going to stop talking here and let Shada talk a little bit, but one of the biggest, I feel like I always go off on these little rants at the beginning, and then I'm like, I need to stop talking. But so one of the biggest differences with, why we chose, all of us chose Michael's course and really wanted to get a deeper dive into understanding lab work is blood work tells such a story. And when Western medicine looks at lab work, they have these big ranges. We're going to talk about ranges, but they just don't do a great job of understanding everything that goes into each test. And when we went through the course, not only did we learn about individual lab markers and panels and what they mean and the lab ranges and everything like that, but we also did really deep dives into the physiology and how and why these markers are run, how they are run, which is super important when it comes to certain specific markers that we're going to touch on today. But it's really about the story. And, I love puzzles. I always love puzzles. And for me, blood work is always a puzzle. And it's about figuring out what is the story, what is the bigger picture, so what is going on between symptoms, between blood work, how we put that all together and look at all the little pieces, and then how do we put that into the bigger pieces, and then where do we start, and how do we narrow that down, and how does that shift and change? And yeah, it's really such a story of what the body is trying to tell us. And I'll also say I've never seen perfect lab work. So if you're like, hi, I have perfect lab work, I've never seen it, even with practitioners, even with myself, and I would consider it, I'm feeling by and large like really great and better than I ever felt. And my lab work still is not quote unquote perfect. And I don't know if there even is, an actual perfect. I don't know if that's ever going to be the case. So yeah, super passionate about lab work, if you can't tell. And so I'm so excited for this episode.
Yes, no, I am too. And I love the puzzle reference because honestly, it's one of my favorite things. Like even before doing consults, when people actually send over their blood work, And at that point, we're not doing like a super deep dive, but we are taking a look at some of these bigger patterns. And just having that is so helpful, like for actually seeing what's going on in the body. And then we talk to someone, get to know their symptoms, what they're dealing with, their lifestyle habits. It just really completes the whole picture there. And the even better part about it is that most people have blood work. Everyone has access to that through their doctor, unlike functional testing, which is still great, but this is just much easier for everyone to have access to. And it tends to be a lot cheaper than some of the functional tests as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, oftentimes in our practice, we'll say, hey, try and go through your doctor. If you have insurance, why would we not use it? We don't make money off of labs, and we do charge for like in-depth interpretations, but that's really for our time and expertise. But we don't actually charge for any labs. And if you can go to your doctor, if you want to ask, you can run it during HSA. But I'll also say I do want to touch on maybe towards the end, because even I talked to several of my friends recently, even friends who are in the holistic health space, who actually I place their lab work, the orders for all of their lab work, because it's cheaper and we get what we want and need, and all of the information for a fraction of the price that some people, and there's a couple of particular markets that we're going to touch on towards the end where I think the goal, I'm going to wait until the end.
Yeah, and as we go through this too, like because the physiology aspect is so in depth, we're going to try and not get super in depth with it, because it probably wouldn't make sense to you if you don't understand all these moving pieces here. So we're going to try and keep it as people friendly as we can, not super, super deep. And then, yes, like Megan said, there are definitely a couple markers on here. I'm looking at our little cheat sheet right now that are not typically included. Like if you were to go to the doctor, I'll just start rolling right into the first one here. So there's something called a CMP, which is a comprehensive metabolic panel. So this is like a standard panel that, you can have run. If you get yearly blood work done, this is probably going to be on it. There's a couple markers that we'll address that may not be on it, that you would have to ask for, and then that gets into the whole other thing that Megan was talking about, where they try and charge you a lot and whatnot. So some of these not as easily accessible through like your regular primary care doctor. But for the comprehensive metabolic panel, so we can get a lot of information from this as far as patterns about the kidneys, hydration status, dehydration status, the liver, gallbladder. That's really what we're pulling a lot of this information from this panel, and a couple nutritional markers as well. But again, they kind of fall into some of these patterns that we're looking at here. So this is one of my favorite things to look at so AST and ALT, which are two liver enzymes. You can tell a lot from these markers. Like if they're pretty high, in just for reference, I believe 20 is the top end for females, 22 is the top end for males. Megan, correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, that's right. Yeah. So if they're crazy high, and we have seen these crazy high before, like in the 60s, that's not something that we see all the time, but it is sometimes. This just means that your liver is struggling to process things out, toxins out, just to do its job in general, and that it definitely needs some support. So right then and there, that's indication of, okay, what's putting the stress on the liver? What else is going on in the body? So those two markers right there are super helpful. When they're low, good indication of a B6 deficiency, because we need B6 for the liver to do its job and do converting in so many other things.
And before we move on from this, I just want to touch on B6 just a little bit, because this is a really important marker. And, we work obviously with people with a lot of chronic issues. And if you have mental health struggles, anxiety, depression, just a lot of cognitive, mental, and emotional issues, oftentimes we will see a B6 deficiency. And the question is, okay, why? And there's some big toxins that deplete B6. Not saying that's the only reason. It can absolutely be digestion related. It can be you're just getting it. Not super common. Usually it's you're running through a really overly running through it for some sort of reason, and or digestion, where we're not actually absorbing it into the body. And this is, one of the first like low hanging fruit that, okay, there's something going on. Why is there a B6 deficiency? And, we need to double check, all right, symptom wise, where are we? Like, what is everything else doing? And it's going to start to get kind of our wheels turning as to, okay, there's probably something bigger going on. And it's certainly the case with something, with these enzymes higher too. But, what is really going on? Why is this happening versus, oh, there's a B6 deficiency. Let's add B6 into this person's, nutritional program, whether that's their food or.
Yeah. And that's the exact difference of looking at it the functional perspective versus the Western perspective. Even when we oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also, not even every person who runs functional labs will ask these questions. I will say, and Shannon and I have both been in this case, and I know we've mentioned it before, but we've been hardcore symptom managed in the functional health and wellness space. And this is often what will happen is these practitioners are trained in functional labs and ranges. However, they are looking at it from a Western medicine perspective, but holistically. And it's not asking the bigger questions of how and why this happened. It's more of, oh, this is going on, so let's symptom manage this. And they're collecting more and more information in regards to that. And you'll see as we go through that we're different and we're asking different questions and thinking about things a little bit differently. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we move on, because this is going to come up again.
Oh, yeah. Well, to add on to that a little bit, that is the whole point, is you have to be looking for these patterns and putting multiple markers together to identify the root, because it doesn't matter if we have, a sodium and potassium or a B6 nutrient deficiency. We're always going to be asking why. Literally, it's like a map trying to trace it back to, okay, why? What is the big issue here that's causing all these issues in the body? So we're never looking at one marker and saying yes or no to something, unless it's like an extreme iron deficiency. Then we're going to want you to take some supplementation for iron, like beef liver. But that's probably the only thing, honestly, where we're looking at one marker. The next one on the list, the next two, are going to be sodium and potassium. So yes, these are both nutrient markers. If they're low, there's definitely something going on there. When both of these are high, it's a really good indication that your body's dehydrated, you're not getting enough water in, you're not getting enough minerals in. I will say that, so sodium, potassium, and magnesium, if we're dealing with a lot of stress, these nutrients get depleted from the body really quickly. So these two markers can also give us an indication of, what's going on with your stress levels, what's going on with your adrenals. When sodium is low, it can indicate that the adrenals are not producing enough aldosterone, and then it's the opposite for potassium. So when potassium is low, it can indicate high aldosterone. So again, multiple patterns that we're looking at here, and this is surely not a direct marker for how the adrenals are functioning, what your cortisol level looks like, but it can give us an indication also with your symptoms and what you're telling us of what you're dealing with and what's going on in your body.
Yeah, I'll say it took me, as someone with a lot of cortisol issues for a long time, it took me forever to get my sodium back into functional range. And it took literally forever. And at one point I was eating so much salt and just and still struggling to get it up, just because my adrenals were so depleted and had been for so long. I'll also say, medications impact things. I'll say that potassium is one of the biggest things that many, many, many medications impact. So when we see potassium trending high, once again, the question is, okay, is this person on any supplements or medications that may be driving that up, particularly if sodium is in functional?
Yeah, definitely. Those are very easily depleted by multiple things, and good point, especially medication. The next one specifically for another dehydration pattern that we look at, there's a marker on the CMP and it's called albumin. And this is something that's produced by the liver. It's a binding protein that helps deliver fatty acids, hormones, minerals, and, does a handful of things in the body. It also has a big role. If this is high, another good indication that we've got some dehydration going on. If it's low, it's good indication that there's inflammation, infection happening, and we need to look further into testing to see what that could potentially be.
Yeah. And this is a really common one. If 4.3 to 4.8 is the standard range that we use for this marker, and we're not going to give ranges for everything, but we will. This one I do see value in sharing this. And this is a really big one. We will often see this, especially with the work that we do with clients, see this trending pretty low. And so, once again, I would say by and large, like inflammation and infection, we need to look at our CDC with differential. It's kind of like where we're going to go next after this. So this is really important. I'll also just say, as we're going through this list, you'll notice that we're not going to mention certain markers. And then just because we mentioned a human here, total protein is something that we don't look at because we're looking at the individual proteins versus the total protein. And so you'll notice as we go through, there are certain markers that we're missing, but on purpose because we need to look at some other markers. Maybe they don't have the best information or they're not the most detailed. Some of the ratios we're not going to look at. So things like that. So just like FYI.
Yeah, you definitely won't hear us go over every single marker through all these panels here. So the next one, it's on the panel itself. You'll see it as BUN, BUN, or sometimes just UN, and it stands for blood urea nitrogen. And what this is a waste product of amino acid breakdown. So when this process is happening, this breakdown actually turns to ammonia in the body, and obviously ammonia is not something that we want lingering in the body. It's very toxic for it if it's not excreted properly through the liver and the kidneys. So this is a really important marker for us to look at here. And then another important marker is called creatinine. So I know creatine is very popular, especially in the workout health realm. I'm sure, Megan, you're very familiar with that. But creatinine is a waste product of creatine metabolism. So one of the things that we're looking at here is when both of these markers are low, it's a good indication that we're not getting enough protein in. Maybe we have low muscle mass. Maybe we're not moving around enough in general. Mostly what we're looking for here is how much protein are you getting in? We can see a lot from these two markers. When they're high, do you want to add something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. When they are high, though, good indication of dehydration. There's quite a handful of markers that we're looking at for dehydration patterns. And then, of course, this does have to do with how the liver and the gallbladder are functioning as well. So this is giving us a general indication on what that looks like as well.
Yeah, and just a couple notes about these two. I will say, by and large, we'll often see both of these low in someone. And this is one of I'd say these two markers are two of the most common markers for us to see trending low, 12 or under. And that's because most people do not eat enough protein. And this is why we're so big on protein intake. It's so necessary for health, for wellness. Muscle mass is so important, especially as we age, especially for us women. We lose bone mass and muscle mass at a faster rate than particularly as we age. And it's very hormone balancing for blood sugar, important just for bone density and overall health. So this is something that we see so often. I will also say, someone who's been in the fitness industry and started in the fitness industry, sometimes, and this has been the case for me, and I've worked with high-performing athletes who are very protein heavy, and this is really common and just something that aware of, and this is why we need to ask more questions, when we see particularly a quote unquote normal or optimal creatinine, but BUN is trending higher, asking what someone's nutrition looks like goes a long way. If someone is eating a very, very high protein diet, and I have fallen into that category where I've been eating, over 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, BUN can start to trend up a little bit. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. This is where we need to ask more questions, and this is where we need to look at everything together. If that's the only marker kind of on this scale that's trending higher and everything else looks pretty good, and from a symptom perspective, like we're feeling pretty good, not a big deal. But this is definitely the case where we will see this thing. So just for reference, it's not always dehydration if it's trending high. If someone is eating a lot of protein, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as the body's handling it appropriately, then we will see this trend high. I'll also say if you're outside of the US, BUN will often show up as urea, just for reference.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely shows up. There's a couple markers that show up different honestly, sometimes it just depends on what lab is running them as well. So you can always ask questions or search it online and it'll pop up. The next marker that we're going to talk about is called GGT, and this is not one, I don't think I've ever seen this, just ran normally by a Western medicine doctor.
I think that's a couple times.
Okay.
It's not a ton, but I have seen it before.
Okay. Yeah. So, you might see it, you might not see it, but it's certainly one that needs to be added onto this, the comprehensive metabolic panel. But it is an enzyme that's involved in the movement of glutathione, which is part of the liver detox processing. So, this marker is really great. I love when we have it because it can give us an indication of what does your toxin load look like? How well is your liver functioning as far as like the detoxing process and whatnot. But I really like to see this especially when it's high and, we're going down the path and we see you have these other indications going on. It's really helpful to see like how big is the situation here? Like what does the toxin load look like in the body? So this is a really helpful marker for that.
And these non-standard markers, what we always say is ideally if you can ask for this and they run it and it can be covered, amazing. It's not required. However, it is helpful. And we will go over a handful of markers that fall into that category of not required and super helpful if we can get access to them. And then in a lot of our panels, I'd say the vast majority of our panels include things like TB.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's in our basic panel, I'm pretty sure.
I think so.
Okay. Next two markers are going to be alkaline phosphatase and chloride. So both of these are really helpful in seeing what your stomach acid levels look like. So if they are low for both of them, good indication that we don't have enough stomach acid production. Something else that we're looking at here is, so for ALK phos is usually what we call it for short. That's what I'm going to start to say because it's a mouthful. So this enzyme is actually zinc dependent. So if this is really low, this can also act as a potential marker for zinc deficiency. There are some other markers that we would like to look at. Of course, if you have a direct zinc marker, that's also helpful. But because, stomach acid, we also need zinc in order to have enough stomach acid. These two kind of tie in together and it gives us a good indication of what that nutrient status looks like as well. And then again, on the flip side for chloride, when it's high, it can also be an indication of dehydration pattern as well.
Just a side note on zinc. It is very common for us to see trending low. And once again, the question is why? Is it digestion related? And a big thing that we will often see, and we will cover this in the next panel that we talked about, if you have a parasite overgrowth, you will very, very likely have a zinc deficiency. These two things go hand in hand so often. And so once again, the question is, okay, well, why do we have a zinc deficiency? Are we just running through it? Are we not getting enough of it? Is our digestion not good? Or is something stealing? And so these are all big questions. The other thing is, if there is a zinc deficiency, which is not that uncommon, please, 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 please do not supplement with zinc by itself for longer than a couple of days. If you are getting sick and you want to take zinc for a few days, that is totally fine. However, if it is more than a few days, please do not do zinc by itself. There's a very delicate balance between zinc and copper, and one of our favorite panels includes a direct zinc and copper marker because this is really important. Not only looking at where are the levels of these two nutrients by themselves, but more importantly, what is the ratio and what does that look like for them? And when we recommend supplementing with zinc, 99.9% of the time, I can think of one instance where we did not do this. And it's
I know what you're talking about too. Yeah.
Yeah. Where we would not recommend zinc with copper, but it's in a 15-to-1 ratio. And that is really what we're looking at. And I just see this happening so often, especially as we're heading into fall and winter and sicker season. Supplementing short term with zinc, okay, but please don't do this long term because you can create some real issues in the body between the zinc and copper balance.
Yeah, and just to give people an idea of something else they can use, like short term, like Megan was saying, a couple days, zinc lozenges are a pretty good option. And then also oysters are very, very, very rich in zinc and all the other nutrients and cofactors. So if you really need to be taking zinc for whatever reason, oyster capsules are a great option for that as well, because you're going to get the other things that you need with it.
Exactly. And this is why food first approach is always valuable, because guess what are in oysters? A great zinc to copper ratio, because it's naturally occurring and nature knows that we need these two things together.
Yep, exactly. Perfect. Okay, so next marker on the list is bilirubin. So bilirubin is a byproduct of heme metabolism, and this also has to do with the color of your bile. So it gives bile the greenish yellow. We've seen other colors happening too, depending on what your stool looks like and whatnot. It can also affect that. So this marker, let me start out by saying, if you don't have a gallbladder, of course this marker is going to be low. That's the biggest thing here, which we have seen before. If it's low, also good indication that there's not enough zinc and there's just not enough bile production happening. We have gone over bile a handful of times in many other episodes. Bile is super important for carrying out toxins in the body and waste and all these things. So we really need to make sure that we have good bile flow. This marker can give us some insight on what that looks like. If it's high, there still might be an insufficient bile flow happening or some type of obstruction. And then if this marker is high, we're also going to go back and look into other liver and gallbladder markers. And again, this is just a piece of the puzzle. We're going to refer back to other things and kind of see what's happening here. Why is this happening?
I will say, of all the markers that we see, and we've, for reference, both of us, and particularly me, just because I've been doing this a little bit longer, I've seen blood work for, hundreds and hundreds of people at this point. It is rare that I see bilirubin in a good place. It is probably, definitely top 30, potentially the number one marker that I see out of range in the vast majority of people. And for a lot of reasons, for me, and Shannon and I are similar ages. I remember growing up and the whole low fat thing was a really big deal. And guess what? That really messes with your bile flow. People not eating good sources of fat, just the liver being overburdened, not having that kind of support, bile gets stuck, it gets stale, people are getting gallbladders out all over the place, some of which are absolutely warranted, some are questionable. So this is just a massive marker that we see out of range for reference. And 0.5 is our low end range, just like if you're looking at your own blood work, 0.5 is kind of our low end where we like to see it at least.
Yeah. Yeah. There are definitely a lot of people who, by all means, yes, necessary for some people to get their gallbladder out. Sometimes it's happening because other things were missed ahead of time, maybe could have been fixed. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation to look into. But okay, so those are the main markers from the comprehensive metabolic panel that we're going to go over. Hopefully that was helpful. This next one that we're going to move into here is probably Megan and I's favorite panel to look at, or part of this panel to look at. So this is going to be the CBC, which stands for complete blood count with differential. So you can get, go ahead.
Before we dive into this, I just want to talk about one other marker that is often
Okay.
on the metabolic panel that we are going to cover this section separately. However, I do want to just mention this. So in the US, at least, often we will also have glucose on a complete metabolic panel or a comprehensive metabolic panel. So just for reference, that usually it's going to pop. When it comes to lab work, a couple of things that we always recommend for the best information. I'm going to talk about, I'm only going to dive deep into one of these right now and save the other one for another piece of this. But ideally, we're going to go first thing in the morning, fasted. Just a basic overnight fast. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, just like a basic overnight fast. And fasting overnight means you are not drinking coffee or having anything other than maybe a little bit of water in the morning, for reference, because that will, anything that you eat or drink, including coffee or any other caffeine source, will impact certain markers. Glucose is a big one. And, looking at blood sugar regulation, fasting glucose is a really, really important marker that we really like to look at. So ideally, you're going first thing in the morning, fasted, legit fasted, nothing overnight, and then also pausing all supplements, not medications, all supplements for 3 to 5 days at least. All supplements. And there are exceptions, that we can make. However, ideally, once again, this is ideally that we're pausing all of those.
Yeah. Do you want to keep, since we're talking about blood sugar right now, do you want to keep going on the blood sugar train?
We can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to let you keep going with this one.
Okay. So yeah, fasting glucose is a really important one we're looking at for blood sugar. So this is really important. And, looking at lows or highs, there's a lot of things that impact blood sugar. If you have PCOS, you might have some blood sugar insulin resistance. We generally call it just blood sugar dysregulation that can include insulin resistance. So that's a really big one. Are we not getting enough nutrients to help regulate our blood sugar? Are we not getting enough protein? Protein's a really big one when it comes to regulating blood sugar. So that's a really, really important one. We also, when it comes to certain toxin overload patterns, and we've touched on this previously, particularly in the mold episode, blood sugar can become dysregulated. And I say that broadly as dysregulated, because sometimes we'll see fasting glucose high or trending low, and insulin and C-peptide and some of these other markers can get really wonky when it comes to this. And so when we see this, we just need to dive a little bit deeper once again. So fasting glucose, if you're in the US, this will come with your comprehensive metabolic panel. If you're outside of the US, you may have to ask for this. However, I've never had anyone have any issues asking for glucose to be run on their labs. HbA1c is the other one that we're often going to see. This is what is often used for a diabetes marker. It is not our favorite. It's just not giving us a great information. And, if we look at, once again, this is like, if we look at other better markers, we're going to get a better idea of what's actually going on and why it's going on versus, this HbA1c. So just not a big fan. Yes, there's some value in it, but not a ton.
Yeah, and it also for HbA1c, it's very easily affected by other things that are going on in the body. So like if you have any sort of, and this is surely not the case for everyone, but if you have any sort of like anemia going on in the body or just in general, other big rooted issues, it's very easily skewed, the HbA1c marker. So it's just not the best to go off of. We're going to talk about a handful of other ones in combination with each other that are much better for information.
Exactly. The next one we'll kind of look at is insulin and or C. And C-peptide is our preference. C-peptide is a more stable marker of insulin. And insulin is, once again, just one of these markers that's very easily impacted high and or low. It's a very sensitive marker. So one of the reasons why sometimes we'll even run pills is to really get a good idea of these patterns. I'll say if you are picking one over the other, we prefer C-peptide. C-peptide, though, is one of those ones that Western medicine really, really rarely runs. It almost always they're going to run insulin. Just once again, it's just the understanding of and physiology of how and what these tests are really looking at, that they're just not in how to look for this. So, and no fault of Western medicine, it's really the medical schools that this is falling under, where they don't deem this to be super important.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll leave it at that. I was about to go on a rant, and I got to stop myself. So yeah, well, we want one and or both of these. Insulin is almost always covered by insurance, and very, once again, it's rare that I ever see pushback on having insulin run. C-peptide, that was a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, and I will say too, for when we're looking at blood sugar markers in this pattern here, blood sugar regulation is so important for the body. I mean, if our blood sugar is dysregulated at all, it's going to affect our hormone health, our stress levels, feeling fatigued, just so many different functions in the body. And the thing is that, yes, we're going to always start to address it from a nutrition standpoint, because for a handful of people, like if we just shift our eating, get more protein in, we can see some improvement in this area. For other people who have bigger toxin issues going on in the body that are affecting the blood sugar, we always have to dive in and find the root and whatnot. But, even for just for an example, for hormone issues, like if you've got all these imbalances going on, which I know we've talked about this before, but, blood sugar regulation is a big part of this. And sometimes that can't be addressed until we find those bigger root issues that are going on. So again, when we're looking at these patterns, and we see that it's dysregulated, we're still saying to ourselves, okay, well, what's causing the dysregulation here? Let's go back. Let's find the root. There's a lot of digging that's going on while we're looking at these markers.
Yeah, and this is why health history is so important. And if you've ever had a consult with us, we ask a lot of questions and we dig deeper into a lot of these things, especially if we have lab work that we get beforehand, that we know we're comparing, and then we're looking at this as we're talking to someone, and we're trying to figure out, okay, well, what is really going on? Is it just a nutritional thing? Is it a lifestyle thing? Is there something bigger going on? Mold is a really big thing that dysregulates blood sugar, and, someone could be on full of the medications to help regulate blood sugar and on all of these things, and with no success. And, just because this is pretty popular right now, all of these, peptides right now that are being used for weight loss, blood sugar, they're calling it blood sugar regulation, but it's really for most people, weight loss. If you're someone, and I'm not going to dig into all of our thoughts on this, but just because we've seen this quite a bit, is if you've taken this for a period of time and you've, most people start low and then work up to some higher dosages, and you're not seeing a big difference in your weight, in your blood sugar regulation, there's a bigger reason why. And, I know there's been great success. We've seen the success. Yes, there are a lot of issues I pull up after taking these peptides. And we've also had quite the handful of people who have tried these peptides with little to no success. And a big reason why we're seeing is toxin overload, particularly because if there is mold in the body, I don't really care what you do to help regulate your blood sugar. I mean, you could have perfect nutrition, your blood sugar could still be all over the place, and you could feel that in your body. And it's really challenging. So just to help you understand that we are seeing this quite a bit, and there's always a bigger reason.
Yeah. Always a bigger reason why, which is exactly why we look at this. There's one other marker that I just want to mention for blood sugar. This is not one that you would regularly see on a panel. You would have to ask for it. It'll be labeled as LDH, and it stands for lactate dehydrogenase. And what this is, it's just an enzyme that's pretty much found in every cell of the body, and it helps convert sugar into energy. So when we look at this, it just gives us a little bit of an idea of essentially how big the blood sugar regulation issue is. It tells us a little bit about the cell function. I would say those are the two main takeaways from it. And again, just another marker to help point us in the right direction of, how bad is this? What's the bigger issue going on here?
Yeah. And I also just want to mention blood sugar is one of the more complicated issues that we often work with, and largely because it's impacted by so many things. And there's a lot of reasons why. There could be signaling issues. The liver plays a really big role. Obviously, the pancreas plays a big role in blood sugar regulation. Nutrition plays a really big role. The cells themselves also play a really big role, and the integrity of the cell plays a really big role. And if glucose or insulin, if there's a signaling issue inside or outside of the cell, we're going to have a lot of complications. And I will say, just from the course that we took, this was one of the more challenging ones for me to understand, and took me a few rounds to kind of go through this to really start to grasp a lot of the physiology that goes into blood sugar regulation. So I feel like we're not doing a super deep dive on purpose, but also I want people to understand that this is really complicated and a really big deal, really big issue. And it's so important. It is a fundamental piece of the body, blood sugar regulation, and more importantly, understanding why this is happening. And so, we've seen people come to us, quote unquote, diagnosed pre-diabetic or even early diabetic stages. And it really doesn't have anything to do with their nutrition. Yes, nutrition can play a really big role, but also understanding, lifestyle and these other bigger stressors that are going on in the body play a massive role when it comes to blood sugar regulation. And it's very, very stressful for the body to have blood sugar dysregulation issues. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And it honestly, and unfortunately, this is a widespread issue. I mean, there are plenty of people who suffer with blood sugar dysregulation issues. You might not even know it, but because there's so many different moving parts and pieces, like Megan was saying, it affects so many things, broad range in the body. So yeah, very, very important piece, and also super complicated. That was also a difficult section for me. Okay. So the next, I'm going to jump back to what we were going to talk about a second ago. So the CBC with differential. CBC stands for complete blood count. The differential part, not always ran. So if you're going to get blood work done, make sure you specify. Most doctors would be fairly willing to run this. Just make sure you say the CBC with differential. So why this is important is because this is the piece that gives us a snapshot into the gut, into the bigger root issues that are happening. So we can find a lot out from this section, these 5 markers that we're going to talk about, especially if we don't have any other sort of functional testing, like an oat test or a mycotoxin test or whatnot. We really need this piece if we want to identify some of the bigger issues going on here.
And
so,
just
go ahead.
There's a pattern here that I have seen, and I don't understand why, but this is a common pattern. If your physician, or you typically use Quest in the United States to get your blood work run, I would say more often than not, we will not see the differential part of the CBC run, versus with LabCorp, we will more often see that run. I have no idea why, but that is a very common thing that I have seen. And I once again, I don't understand why, but yeah, this differential part is so, so, so important. So be sure to ask for it. And it's, if we look at individual pricing on our end of the CBC versus the CBC with differential, I mean, it is a couple dollars. And I've never had someone where I've mentioned, hey, make sure you're getting the differential part where the physician hasn't been open to running. Once again, most physicians are trained to look at this differential part in the way that we do, so they don't see as much value in it. They also use this panel shrine, which is a mistake. So just I'll lay that one out there. It's a mistake. And so just some general information as to this little about this.
Yeah. And I want to throw this out there too, because I have seen this happen time and time again. We've also experienced it. My fiance, Rob, and I, if you are like really sick, say you're going to the ER for something, it's super odd to me that they don't run the differential part, because we can get so much information about that. So if you're in that situation, ask for that. If they're running blood work, just say, hey, can you make sure you run the differential part with the CBC? Because it's going to pull up a lot of information there. And that is something I will never understand why they don't run it. It literally baffles me. I have nothing else to say about that.
Yeah, and really important when it comes to chronic issues and also acute issues to have this information. And when we get to the actual differential part, this will make a lot more sense.
Yeah. So, okay, basically these 5 markers, they are 5 types of white blood cells in the body. I'm going to go over the first 2 here because there's lots of different patterns that intertwine with each other. So go ahead.
Let's back up and let's start with just the complete blood count portion. So white blood cell count. Let's start.
Okay, go. I'm going to let you continue on with that.
Yeah, so the first marker that we'll often see is WBC, or white blood cell count. This is often a sign of inflammation when trending high, and 6 is kind of our upper range. And then when it's trending low, 3.5 or under, this will often be a sign that the immune system is down-regulated. Often we'll see chronic viral issues, although there can be quite a few other reasons for this as well, but we'll often see that the immune system down-regulated. When we also see it high, this can also be a sign of, and this is not the case 100%, so if you fall into this category, I don't want to scare you, but we will see if there's autoimmunity present. Oftentimes we'll see the immune system upregulated for some reasons. We'll see it trending high, but it can also just be generalized inflammation that is happening in the body. And then the next kind of set of markers, we kind of do two groups here. So we've got the red blood cell count that we do, hemoglobin and hematocrit. We kind of clump these 3 together because they're very similar in nature. And when we see these trending high, often a sign of dehydration. So we just want to look, we'll look back at the comprehensive metabolic panel, and we'll take a deeper look at, are there other dehydration markers? I'll also say sometimes it's acute. If it's like borderline high, sometimes it's acute dehydration, especially if you haven't had any water to drink that morning. So just, something that we're looking out for. Is it acute? Is it mild? Or is it pretty? We're also probably going to ask you, how much water do you typically drink? And that will give us a good indication. When these are trending low, these 3 in particular are often used for iron and diagnosing anemia, which once again, we believe is a mistake. When these are trending low, these are often signs of nutrient deficiencies related to the absorption of iron. And this is really important. It may not be an iron deficiency itself. It may not be iron deficient anemia. And when we get to anemia, which we will probably end up with a part 2 here, just based on the timing here, we'll dive into that a little bit more, but it's really important to understand that there's different types of anemia. And just because you are anemic doesn't mean you are strictly iron deficient. It can also very much be inflammation related. It could be a nutrient cofactor related. And particularly if we've seen other nutrient deficiencies happen, zinc, copper, vitamin A, your B vitamins, and there's a handful of others here. But we'll often see these 3 markers trending low. it's really an issue with these cofactors that are required to absorb iron. This is the real issue. So this is why additional information is really important when it comes to iron. And I'm working with one of my friends through this right now, where all three of these markers are trending low. They're saying she should get iron infusions and take straight up iron. And, she asked me for my opinion, and obviously I have a wildly different opinion. And I was like, hey, look, we just need more information first to understand where you are. And is it an iron issue? Is it an iron absorption issue? So this is really important to understand that these three markers are really important and not the be all end all when it comes to iron and iron absorption and diagnosing anemia.
Yeah. And I hate to change direction again, but I kind of want to talk about the rest of the iron markers since you were just talking about it right now. Or do you prefer we continue with the CBC?
Yeah, let's hold off because I think the CBC is going to take us to the end of this episode, and we'll do another one because the iron, we can go. We have a lot of feelings on iron and
yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then, kind of the next three that we look at is MCV, MCH, MCHC. Once again, when these are trending high, we are often looking at a B9 or B12 deficiency or both. And really valuable information, if we can run folate, which is B9 and or B12, just additional valuable information to have. When these are trending low as well, often it's a cofactor issue of iron once again. So once again, we'll see sometimes, all 6 of these might be trending low, and someone might say, okay, well, you have an iron issue, you're anemic, we need iron infusions, or you need to take straight up iron. And once again, we believe that is a mistake. And the question is, okay, well, let's look a little bit deeper. Why? What is going on here? Let's look at gut. Let's look at the digestion, which once again, this is where the differential part of that CBC comes in. And it's so valuable. And then also, if we can run additional nutritional markers, a lot of value in that and understanding deeper what specifically are we deficient in? Is it just about everything? In which case, we're going to look at nutrition and then more importantly, digestion. There's usually a digestion issue going on. So really important information that the first part of this, just the CBC has, and it really lends us to ask more questions and needing to dive a little bit deeper into some other things, specifically iron and anemia patterns, which once again, we're not going to get to today. We'll do a part 2, and because we've got iron and cholesterol, which are going to be really big topics that we're going to talk about, and vitamin D for that matter. So we'll save that for a part 2, but we'll finish up this differential part because we still have a lot to cover with.
Yeah, and this is a good ending part too, because I feel like people are going to you're going to get a lot of help, a lot of insight from this portion here. So yeah, that was a basic part of the CBC that you will normally see ran. And then this is that additional part, the differential. So the first 2 things we're going to talk about are neutrophils and lymphocytes. So you're going to see a percent value and an absolute value for both of these markers. So for neutrophils, the percent range is going to be 50 to 60 for our range, the functional range, and the absolute is going to be 1.85 to 3.25 at the top end. For lymphocytes, 30 to 37 for the percent range, and for the absolute range, it's going to be 1.1 to 2.1. So our ranges for both of these markers are smaller than what you would see on the Western medicine side. So when we're looking at these, there's some big patterns here that we can see. So when neutrophils are trending higher than the lymphocytes, this can demonstrate that there's some sort of bacterial issue going on, some sort of gut dysbiosis going on, and that's a really big thing that we look at. So that's going to be when neutrophils are trending high and lymphocytes are trending lower. When we look at the lymphocytes, again, as we just talked about, when they're low, neutrophils are probably going to be higher, and we're going to see some sort of like bacterial pattern going on there. When lymphocytes start to trend high, but they're still lower than the neutrophils, this can indicate that there's some sort of like viral issue going on in the body. It could be you have an active viral infection, something like Epstein-Barr virus. It could be that you're in a flare. some in, one of these viruses that are laying dormant in your system is flaring up right now. If we wanted to get super specific with what it actually was, we would have to do additional testing. But in general, that pattern of lymphocytes trending high, but still lower than the neutrophils, which would be that 50 bottom end for the neutrophils, good indication that there's some sort of viral issue at play here. And I also want to add on to that viral issues are not something that we will normally address firsthand, because if that's showing up, there's still something else that's going on in the body, especially for most people. If it's not an active infection, it's just a flare. Well, we want to ask, what flared you up? Like, did you get sick? Were you exposed to different toxins? We have to do a little bit more digging there, and we're probably not going to start addressing the viral stuff immediately. The other pattern that we see when we're looking at lymphocytes is that when the lymphocytes start to trend higher than the neutrophils, okay, so let's say they're at like 55, just for an example, this is a good indication that there's some really bigger issues going on here, something potentially like an autoimmune pattern. That's when we're going to start to look into that, when we see those lymphocytes go over the neutrophils. And if that is the case, if it is some sort of autoimmunity issue going on, of course, more testing is helpful. Addressing the root issue is helpful. Addressing life factors is helpful. But for your body to get to that point, it has to have gone through a lot to get there. Like it's pretty beaten down at that point, if this is the pattern that we're seeing, which we have definitely seen it before.
Exactly. And just a few things here. So if you are outside of the US, usually you're only going to see the absolute value. You will not see a percentage. So just keep that in mind. This is also a breakdown of that white blood cell count. So things that we do take into, for example, if someone's white blood cell count is crazy high, 10, 12, we do take that into account in understanding and kind of this breakdown, because oftentimes if someone's white blood cell count is that high, everything's going to be super high. And so that's where the percentages do come into play, and you can manually do the percentages. If you're outside of the US, and we will too, is we'll take a look at what's the actual percentages, and we can do that ourselves so that we get a better idea of what is actually going on. We've talked about SIBO, and we can continue to talk about SIBO, especially on social media here. And, one of the reasons that we don't recommend testing for SIBO almost ever is, one, it's a symptom. And, we can usually tell by someone's symptoms if they probably have some sort of SIBO or some sort of bacterial overgrowth going on. And, we can also look at this differential. And SIBO will often show up. We'll see this elevated neutrophils going on. And in which case, once again, we know it's a symptom, and we know it's going, it's likely going on, especially if we couple that with someone's symptoms. So there's not a lot of value in spending an extra $100, $150 on a SIBO blood test. So just keep that in mind. Also, if we do see this autoimmune pattern, and we will do an episode at some point on specific autoimmunity and autoimmune issues, keep in mind that autoimmune issues are very complex, and they're not, and I know you've touched on this before, especially in our chronic viral episode, but there is a genetic factor, and that is not the only thing that plays out. And if you have a family history of autoimmunity, okay, the question is, what is triggering these genes to turn on throughout the family? Mold, heavy metals, super, super common. Parasites, especially if it's starting from the mother and then down to multiple children. Guess what? We get a lot of our initial gut health from our mothers as we come out, or we don't if we're born via C-section, which is one of the reasons, we always ask that question when we start with clients, how are they born? Because that does impact things starting early on, and it's valuable information to know. So even if there is, autoimmunity, viral issues, these bacterial issues, once again, the question is, okay, but why? Why and how did this happen? And once again, just I have a history of autoimmunity, have a history of SIBO, have a history of kind of viral issues. And I was symptom managed for all of those things for years with no massive improvement, little improvement here and there, but no real long-term improvement. And it wasn't until I started to learn to ask those questions of how and why did this happen? Why is my immune system responding this way? Why is my immune system not able to keep some of these chronic viruses that we almost all had? 90+% of the population have dormant EBV, which is normal, and our body should be able to keep it dormant. And if it's not, okay, well, why? With SIBO, and this is a particularly hot topic for me right now, which is why I'm a little aggressive with this, because I've just had a lot of conversations recently about this, particularly on social media. And, if you're only addressing SIBO, why and how did it get there? Bacteria is not supposed to be in your small intestine. It's supposed to be in your large intestine, and it's not supposed to overgrow up in your small intestine. And if you just pull what's in your small intestine, guess what's going to happen at some point? It's going to regrow unless you understand and address the how and the why that it got there. And this is so important to understand with any chronic gut issues, including parasites. We all have parasites. We all have bacteria. We all have yeast. We all have fungus. We all have these things in our body. And the question is, why and how did it get there? And this is, why we need to look at all of these panels together and not just say, okay, well, you've got chronic viral issues, so let's look at your immune system. Let's do some sort of antiviral. Let's just do an antimicrobial protocol and then add probiotics. No, we cannot do that, because this is how we end up with recurrent and long-term issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're pretty, given both of our history in what we've been through in our own health journeys, we are really, really passionate about this, that symptom management is, yes, sometimes it's necessary if we're dealing with extreme digestive discomfort. But other than that, we have got to find the root issue and address it, or else you're going to be just repeating the same things over and over and over again, which, we've both been through. So when we're talking about root issues, this kind of applies to this next portion of the differential protocol. So monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, these all give us good indication of parasite levels in the body. So for monocytes, if you have, our low end of the range is 6. So anything greater than 6%. If that's high, say it again. 6%. Thank you. Yeah. Anything greater than 6%, good indication of infection, inflammation is happening, parasites may be present. I will say that sometimes we don't always see this marker moving. If someone is coming to us and they're experiencing really bad digestion symptoms, like SIBO symptoms, lots of gas, constipation, diarrhea, whatever it may be, acid reflux, this marker isn't always going to move, because parasites are so tricky to test for. So we see it both ways. If I've seen this number, high and someone has symptoms, or I've seen this number be right at 6 and someone still has all these symptoms, we're probably still going to address parasites if that's the case. Eosinophils is another marker that we look at, and anything above 3% for this marker. So this can be elevated if you have allergies, say you're in allergy season and you get blood work done, this might show up as elevated. It's also a good indication of parasites combined with these other markers. If you have asthma, this marker can also be elevated as well. Basophils is the last one on this panel. So I don't really see this marker moved a lot. I've seen it a couple times, but anything greater than 1% here. So, if this is elevated, good indication of gut inflammation, parasites, again, allergies, when it's elevated. So this can also indicate a mast cell issue, which we've talked about, I think, in our mold podcast. We talked about mast cell issues, but when basophils can turn into mast cells. So, if this is high, not only are we going to be thinking about parasites, but we're also going to start questioning molds, because mast cells are very common with mold, and we're going to go down a whole bunch of other patterns here when we see this elevated.
Exactly.
And then one more thing in general here, when we see neutrophils in lymphocytes like normal neutrophils in lymphocytes with elevated monocytes and eosinophils, plus you're presenting with digestive issues, again, like the lights are going off. It's like, okay, parasites here. Parasites are at play, which is a really, really big root cause for a lot of people.
Yes. And, we did a whole episode on parasites. So if you're interested in learning more about that, feel free to go back and listen to that episode. But this is the best way to look at any sort of testing when it comes to parasites. They so rarely show up in direct blood tests because you can't actually run direct blood tests for a variety of parasites. Stool testing often includes a, parasite portion, or you can get stool tests that include that. And they so often do not show up. And parasites are so sneaky. And this is one of the best ways that we can really look at, these three markers, the monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils, looking at these patterns and then coupling that with symptoms. It's by far the best way to look at parasites. And you can still have parasites and not have this pattern show up. Just by the way, they're so sneaky. So just for reference, if you're interested in diving deeper into the parasite world, go check out our other episode on parasites. But please understand that this is one of the big reasons why we really, really, really want this differential is we need to understand if parasites are at play or not. And are we having these patterns kind of pop up? Because this is the best way to test. And it's not perfect. No test is perfect. But this is going to be the best way, coupled with the symptoms, to look at parasites. And parasites are a massive, massive, massive root cause of so many issues. Gut issues, hormone imbalances, thyroid issues, cognitive issues, inflammatory issues, so many things, joint pain, autoimmunity. So this is really, really, really important, which is why we really push, having this differential part of the CBC run, because all of this is really, really valuable information.
Yeah. And seriously, if you're questioning like, well, how do I get parasites? Because we naturally all do have a level of parasites in our body. Go listen to the parasite episode, because we cover everything, like how easily exposed to them we are, how it's supposed to be balanced in the body, all that stuff. So that's a great resource if you're interested in diving deeper into that.
Yes, exactly. So I think this is a good stopping point for right now. And I think we have more than enough for another episode on all the other markers that we didn't cover today, including, looking at iron and anemia, and then also cholesterol. We're going to do some into these, including vitamin D. It'll be a very good controversial episode. Okay.
It will be.
Wait, it's going to be good. So thank you so much for joining. Hopefully this was helpful. And, a big reason why we wanted to do an episode around this is so that you can advocate for yourself when you go get labs run, so you understand a little bit more as to why certain things are really important. And I know we didn't touch on too many markers that are going to be super controversial, in this episode. We will get some more in the second episode, but being able to advocate for yourself and having some baseline information goes such a long way. So hopefully that's helpful. And we will absolutely do a part 2 and have that come out in the next few weeks. But hopefully you learned a lot. Thanks for joining us. As always, like, subscribe, follow, all the things. Any 5-star reviews, if it resonates, means absolutely the world to us. And really does do a whole lot for us. Really appreciate that. And thank you for joining, and we will see you next time.